you, Caroline. Thank you for such a nice introduction. I'm just going to share my screen because I have let me just check. There we go. I'm just going to share my screen with you so that you can see my PowerPoint presentation. And if there are any problems with seeing it, please do let me know. But I'll start off just following on from that introduction to kind of explain a little bit about myself. You've kind of heard already the role that I do at Southampton, and I am responsible for looking after academic skills, both pre and post entry. And that is largely situated around that transition from school to university and throughout a student's education with us. But I want to tell you a bit more not just about my job, but kind of where that passion comes from. And that is really because I struggled myself with the transition from school to university. I didn't find it easy. And so it's something that I've been really committed to, and all of my colleagues are committed to, in supporting students to kind of overcome some of those difficulties that perhaps we might have faced with the academic difference between school or college and university. There's lots of other ways that you will transition from school to university, but we're going to be focusing today on the academic side of things. So what I really hope you will have by the end of this session is a sense of all those things that you can see on screen there. You will have that sense of how teaching and learning is going to be quite different at university, both in terms of the sessions that you will face in terms of kind of taught sessions, but also what your role as a university student is going to be. So what onus is going to be on you as an independent learner, and then kind of going through how you start to develop yourself into an independent learner if you aren't already. You may already think that you are, but I think university will stretch you that little bit further. The kind of learning that you are engaged with at the moment, because of the nature of the assessment and that need to, certainly for universities, to understand your position in terms of your knowledge and things like that, that you are tested on what you know and perhaps less on the application and less of your independent thought. And that changes when you get to university. Of course, I know many of you have been doing A-levels with an EPQ alongside it. Others of you might have had the opportunity to do the IB extended essay, or perhaps you've had some other kind of project that has allowed you to be a little bit more independent. Those opportunities are exactly the kinds of things that will help you in developing these kind of skills of academic independence. So the rest of the session will help you do that, particularly around academic reading, preparing for readings and lectures, and also thinking about academic referencing. That's certainly a personal reflection. If there could have been one thing that I could have learnt before going to university, it would have been how to do academic referencing, and it would have just ensured that I hit the ground running. So I've got some examples as well of how you can kind of go away and practice this in a way that will potentially be quite interesting to you, and I'll share that link with you following this session. So I want to kind of move away from just hearing or you hearing me kind of talking at you. And I'm certainly keen to understand what you think at this stage, so that hopefully you'll be in a slightly different place by the end of the session. So I would like to give you a couple of minutes really to have a think about some of the questions that you can see on the screen there. So please get a pen and paper out and start thinking about, what are your expectations? How do you anticipate that learning is going to be different to what you are experiencing at the moment? How do you think teaching might be different? You're very used to a certain teaching style. What do you anticipate may be different there? What types of assessments or pieces of work do you think you're going to be undertaking, and how do you think that might be different? One of the things I'm also really keen on understanding with all of our students and any student I kind of engage with is, what are some of your concerns or your fears about that transition to university? And I'd really like you to share some of those within the chat. If you have a question, I'd keep that for the Q&A. But if you have a comment, particularly around things that you're willing to share, that you are concerned about, please do feel free to add that in the chat. And I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. So I'll just go quiet for a little while to give you that thinking space. Okay, thank you so much. I was a little bit concerned there to start off with. I was thinking nobody's going to be brave enough, but actually many of you have been. I can see that somebody's raised their hand. I'm just going to go to the chat and the Q&A first and just go through that. Avniel, please correct me if I get if I get the pronunciation of your name wrong. You are completely correct. There is a lot more freedom, and that does bring with it that sense of self-discipline, and that can be really challenging when it happens to you for the first time. So you have to have that kind of curiosity and that desire to learn, and that's wonderful, because you can take your learning in whatever way that you would like to, but it does come hand in hand with that motivation, self-discipline, and I think you've got it right there. Being disciplined and being consistent is definitely the way forward. Joshua, to take your question, are lectures compulsory? It usually depends on the institution. In most places they're not. At Southampton they are not. Seminars are compulsory, and again that will require that self-discipline, particularly when it's 9 a.m. lecture, and maybe you've been reading late, or you've been out, or you've been doing other things and you've gone to bed late. Yes, that will need self-discipline. Another question from Avniel. My teacher forces me to do parkrun every week. Is this compulsory at university? For the sake of my health and well-being, I wish it was, but no, unfortunately, it isn't. You may well enjoy that, but I wish somebody would come and make me go to parkrun every week. That would be wonderful. But we do, certainly at somewhere like Southampton, I think we've got the second largest in the UK. So if you like parkrun, there's usually going to be a parkrun at any kind of institution that you've kind of come across. So how will the relationship between staff and pupils be different at university? And I've just seen that I got the pronunciation right. Which is good. So the relationship is slightly different, and I would say it's slightly freer, but you also have to kind of dictate that relationship a little bit more. So you have to take greater responsibility for it. Unlike in school where teachers are perhaps going to be on your back a little bit more, they're going to be asking you, where's your homework? When have you done this? Have you gone to parkrun? All of those kinds of things. You're not going to find that at university. You will have to be the person who is responsible for accessing your personal academic tutor. And if you have concerns or questions or things that you want to talk about with your learning, the onus is on you to make that call. Right, so I'm just going to hop over to the Q&A, and then we'll kind of move on. So one of the questions that somebody asked was about, I know teaching is in larger groups than you're used to and some in smaller groups. I'm actually going to go through that in the next slide, so I hope I'll be able to answer that one. And certainly in terms of kind of university finances, Avniel, can I leave that one to the end, if that's okay? And I can certainly explain, Joshua, about how modules are different from the system that you use in A-level. As well, I can certainly talk about classes, and I will also talk about some of the exams. I can talk about all of those things as we go through, and if there is anything that I miss, please just remind me. But I suggest I'm going to close that, and we'll go on to the next slide. So this will, I hope, will answer some of your questions. There are many different types of learning that you will, or learning opportunities that you will have. So they will be a combination of some of your taught hours, your taught time. So that might be, like you can see on the left-hand side of the screen there, it might be a large lecture theatre. So some of our biggest lecture theatres at Southampton will host over 400 people in them. However, it depends on the kind of programme that you are doing. And if you are doing a really small programme, you're likely to be perhaps in more of a classroom environment for your lectures. Now, the way that these lectures tend to work, because this feeds into a question that I've been asked around modules, certainly at Southampton, instead of 3 terms like you have at school, we have 2 semesters. So our semester runs from October through to the end of January. Obviously, we have the Christmas break. And then the second semester runs from the beginning of February until sort of the end of May, beginning of June. And what we have we have a long Easter period off as well. Now, what happens there is in the first semester, you will likely take 4 modules, and you will do the same again in the second semester. Now, depending on how many are going to be compulsory for you or core modules, you'll have to do those modules. Others will be optional, and you will find that there are different types of assessment depending on the type of module it is. So some might be 100% exam, in which case, if it was a first semester module, you would face that at the end of January. Or other modules might be non-examined assessments. So they might be pieces of coursework or lab work or things like that, which kind of takes me to some of those other images. So you'll have your lectures, which you're already really familiar with from the questions that you've kind of asked of me or the comments that you've put in the chat. There's also something called a seminar, which is usually a much smaller environment. So this might be sort of anywhere between 5 and kind of 10, 15 people. And what you will find is that a lecture is largely didactic. So you'll be taking information from what the lecturer is saying. Whereas in a seminar, that you are allowed to kind of explore that a little bit more. You will do more reading in preparation for that seminar. And you will be asking lots more questions, talking with your peers, talking with that seminar leader to try and get some of those answers. For others of you, depending on the programme, you may have some workshops where you might be using particular equipment. You may have some labs or even, things like anatomy classes and those kinds of things. Some of our programmes as well see students go on field trips, and those might be within the UK, or there are some international opportunities. It's all really dependent upon the type of course that you are going on. Now, what I would say with all of these opportunities is the taught time and the time that you spend with members of staff is certainly, in some cases, can be a fraction of the time that you will spend on your studies, whereas with other courses, they can be more intensive, like medicine, like engineering. However, the picture in the bottom corner on the right-hand side is indicative of how much time you are going to be spending guiding your own learning, doing your own learning, that independent learning. And I want you to be really clear of how important that is, because it feeds in to all of the different types of study and assessments. This is kind of reflecting back on some of those things that you might be examined on. So yes, of course, we do have the traditional essays, and we do have traditional exams like you have experienced at A-level. However, there are so many other ways in which you may be assessed, and we are always trying to think as creatively as possible as academics about, how we can assess your understanding and your application and your challenge to the discipline, because really that's what it's about. It's about no longer kind of absorbing and regurgitating knowledge. It is about challenging it. So you will see things like reflective journals, maybe, as a form of assessment or mode of study, where you are really questioning things. You'll have an opportunity to work in all of the ways potentially that you can see there, dependent upon the course. So it is quite different, I hope, to what you may have experienced before. And certainly for example, some of the group projects, some people absolutely hate working in groups, and I'm probably one of those people. However, the kind of thing that you get to work on and the kind of problem that you're allowed to examine is so interesting that you will really, really enjoy the experience. What I would say is certainly that there are kind of three key elements to ensuring that you are equipped for this independent study, this change in the type of learning you're going to experience and the type of assessment that you are going to engage with. And I've kind of got like a 3P rule of preparation, presence, and pursuit. So that preparation that you will do before your structured learning, i.e. your lectures, seminars and tutorials, your presence within them, how you conduct yourself, and how you maintain your interest whilst you are, in a lecture or in a seminar, things like that. And then your pursuit of that knowledge further, and that pursuit of that area of work that you may well be interested and want to know more about, because that's what we really want to see. So in terms of preparation, it starts with the basics. It starts with your time management. And this is something I think we've all sort of experienced within the pandemic over the last couple of years. We have had to be a bit more disciplined with the work that we're doing. I think school has been beneficial for many of you in kind of keeping that routine going. Whereas when you get to university, there will, of course, be your timetable, which will keep you kind of guided in what you're doing, but it might be quite sporadic. So some of your modules, like I've described there, sort of between 1 and 4 modules usually, you might look at that and think, that looks completely different to my school timetable. I'm going to be so free. All of this free time that I have, I'm going to have a great time. But you will want to factor in all those other things. Most importantly, clearly, I haven't factored in parkrun on a Saturday, but I've definitely factored in lunch. You'll want to do that. You'll need to think about that time. You'll need to think about your social life and also the boring things like doing your own washing, which, I mean, I'm in my 30s now. I still hate having to do my own washing. It's one of those lesser joys of adulthood. But so you've got a lot of space around all of those other things. And you might have stuff that kind of creeps in during the day that you may need to do. But I wouldn't see those gaps as just free time. You will be wasting your time and you'll be wasting your education and your opportunity to learn. I would factor in time where you can spend good chunks of time on independent study, and however that works for you, whether that's in a busy common room where you are kind of, looking at, stuff online, or whether you're a bit more like me, you like the quiet and the peace of a university library, but structure in that time and try to be as disciplined as possible, and work with friends who you meet there to try and make you all the more disciplined. Carrying on with this idea of preparation, one of the key things that I always say to students in thinking about their academic transition to university, where you can feel a little bit lost, is sometimes around the process. So ask the university that you are going to. Hopefully they will be telling you already. But what is your virtual learning environment going to be? Where is the place that you're going to get all of your information, and how do you get access to it? So at school or college, you might use Google Docs, you might use Moodle, you might use Unifrog. Like, there's a whole host of different platforms that schools and colleges use. At the University of Southampton, we use something that's called Blackboard. I remember when I came to Southampton, I remember people talking about this Blackboard thing, and I was thinking, wow, like, we're in the 21st century, aren't people using whiteboards? But nobody told me what it was. So just ask for what that VLE is, what that virtual learning environment is, because it's through here when you log on to things like this, and you will find this if it's Moodle, if it's Canvas rather, not Canva, two different things. you will find all the courses that you are enrolled on. Now, my list there, that's my actual list, is quite busy there. Yours would be much simpler. You would likely only have your 4 modules. And what you'll find is when you click on one of those modules, in whatever platform that you have, it gives you all of the information. So you will need to know perhaps some of the module information. So I would always recommend going and having a look at that in whatever format that it might be. Certainly, most modules will have like a module handbook or a module overview. And it's when you open that kind of document that you will, let me just go back to that, that you will see perhaps some of the lectures, what those lectures are going to focus on, and what preparatory reading that you will need to do. And it will usually give you like a reading list. And so it will be about kind of going and finding some of these. Now, to help you with that sort of understanding, my colleagues and I put together almost like a mini module to give you a flavour of the kinds of things like this session that you've been to today, that you will experience. And then we've put together a series or 2 kind of packages, sort of lectures. So we've got the Dr. Google package, which was my colleague, Dr. Becky Nash, and Facing the Future package, which was Dr. Rich Penny. Now, these were done in early lockdown because this was a time when, year 13 students needed that a lot. But you will see in those, and we can provide the link so that you can kind of explore some of this, that you will see that there is preparatory readings for the lecture, ahead of the lecture, so that you understand more about it, that there might be some example notes that you could take, and then some kind of seminar questions that might stem from it. And that kind of gives you a flavour of the process that students will go through, and gives you that flavour of the university education. So, for example, you may wish to go and look at Becky's Dr. Google one. It will give you an overview of what the lecture is about. And this is exactly what you would get at university as well. We've designed it entirely around this. And you will find that Becky has put together a series of readings for the Dr. Google Taster Lecture. And with all of these readings, you will find that academics, the people who are teaching you, they go a little bit overboard with the information. They will give you more reading than you can possibly ever do. So there will usually be kind of compulsory reading. There might be kind of, like recommended readings, so stuff that you want to go further on. If you really love the subject that they're talking about, they will also give you sort of like some further reading. Now, you are not expected to do all of that. You will be expected to do the required reading and possibly some of that recommended reading. And then, as you choose to direct your own learning, you might think this bit of the module perhaps isn't my thing. But next week, I want to read everything, absolutely everything about this subject. And that's for you, like I said, to kind of dictate your own learning. Now, how do you go about accessing some of this? Because sometimes when you see a list of stuff that you need to find, you may not know how to find it. And nobody's going to be there to hold your hand through doing that. Most universities, like Southampton, will have a library, and they will give you training in how to use the library. But certainly for some of those practice ones that I mentioned there will be stuff that you'll just be able to kind of copy and paste and pop into Google. Or failing that, if Google's not working for you, I really would recommend accessing Google Scholar. So, for example, one of the on Becky's reading list, one of the papers was from a government website, was from the UK government website. Now, that is kind of, something that you would just find if you copied and pasted it off the reading list and popped it into Google. It would probably be your top hit. You'd be able to access that PDF and read it at your leisure. Whereas some of those other pieces, they might look a little bit alien to you. They might be journal articles, they might be book chapters, in which case you can have a look at some of the stuff that you will find, that you need to find on Google Scholar. So copy and paste it again into Google Scholar. If you don't know how to find Google Scholar, Google the words Google Scholar and you will find it. What you will come across is, since we've gone into the pandemic, more publishers, like the publisher of this journal article, have made a lot more kind of freely available online. So you can access it usually by just kind of clicking on the PDF link there, and it will pull up the journal article, and you'll be able to kind of perhaps do some skim reading, or read the whole thing thoroughly, which is kind of the next step that I want to move on to in terms of your preparation. Accessing that reading, not just finding it, but what you do with it when you're looking at it, and how you then take this into your lectures. This approach, I would always recommend being both efficient, active, and critical. And I'm going to talk through those 3 stages so that you've got some kind of tools to enable you to do this. So thinking about being efficient, the first thing that I would always say is, if you are asked to read a book, an academic book, don't bother reading it cover to cover. You simply don't need that. For the most part, you will find that that you can just look through the contents pages and you can see chapters that you might be interested in. Or if you can't quite find that, you might want to go to the index and then scan through that. The same with journal articles or with chapters of books. You may not need to read the whole thing. So have a scan through an introduction of a chapter, or the introduction or abstract of the journal article. Does it give you a sense of what you need? Can you just kind of get from there? Sorry if you can hear my doorbell going. We'll ignore that. Does the introduction of the book or the journal article give you a sense of what you need? Or is it worth reading in much greater depth? Are there particular chapters of the book that you would like to go through? And if there is, employ different reading techniques for your differing needs. Don't read in detail everything that you possibly need. Scan things, look through and, maybe skim through and see if you can perhaps come across a particular word or phrase that you need to look for, or, skim it, reading quite quickly, getting a gist of it, but don't waste your time, because you just don't have enough time at university to do that detailed reading. Make sure that the detailed reading you are doing is exactly what you need and nothing else. And also, I cannot stress this enough, particularly, I would say particularly for students like yourselves. It can be really tricky moving from absorbing knowledge. Students before they come to university really do struggle with this, because you are never challenged to think critically. You are asked to remember things. You are asked to perhaps apply them and regurgitate that knowledge to demonstrate that you have that knowledge. Whereas what we are doing at university is trying to advance knowledge, which requires you to question that which has come before. So thinking about, more than just understanding something or being able to summarize it, it is about developing your own views, challenging evidence that you've come across, perhaps challenging the methodology of something that you've read, challenging the conclusions that people have come to. And it can be quite a tricky balance. So it is, you have to develop this sense. It's about being skeptical without being cynical. And that can be quite tricky. As is, being open-minded to ideas without being, persuaded by every single thing that you come across. You've got to kind of let stuff in, but also, keeping a space whereby you can, just retain what you firmly believe based on the evidence that you've come across, and about being analytical without being nitpicky. So when you are questioning somebody's methodology, for example, you might be saying, I'm not convinced by the approach that they've taken, without perhaps saying, well, they've only they've only done 3 focus groups, for example. There's a very real difference in how you go about doing that. And certainly in thinking about your preparation, presence, and pursuit in lectures as well. So taking this forward and also taking notes around some of your reading. It's coming into that sense of being a more active learner. So yes, you'll do your preparation in terms of finding some of your resources to read. But if you're anything like me, I can get quickly distracted by things. And I can find it difficult to focus, and particularly in a very warm lecture theatre, when you're a bit sleepy, it can be challenging to focus, to concentrate. So I recommend thinking about what type of notes you want to take. And I would apply this to reading as well as to lectures. So be active with your reading, highlight things, take notes around the edges, and that kind of thing, so that it kind of keeps you on track. And with lectures, that also helps maintain your focus. Something that I always used to do was to try and take as many notes as possible, so that it kind of kept me going. And there are different methods for doing this, and you may wish to explore some of these over the summer period, so that you feel equipped when you get to university. Some of the common methods that are out there include the Cornell method, the outline method, and also the boxing method. Now, how you want to take notes depends on you. I still prefer pen and paper. I'm a little bit old school. Some of you might have technology that allows you to kind of set this up really, really well. But again, ensuring that you have your methods and have how you're going to be taking these notes is part of really important preparation. And this allows you to think about what your pursuit is going to be further. So you've done your prep before, you're reading some of this work, you go to your lecture. What have you taken out of this that you want to go back and look at further? So even after a lecture, you might want to consolidate that learning, go through your notes, but also you may wish to pick up some additional reading that you may want to do. And when it comes to referencing, I always try to move away from just the sense of referencing. At university, you will hear the term academic integrity mentioned a lot. And I want to be really clear on what academic integrity is and why it's important. There's a courtesy factor. So when you are utilising the ideas of another person, so somebody who you are reading their work, they're sharing their ideas, and you may use that for your work. First of all, it's a good thing to be using other people's work, to be able to demonstrate that there is credibility to what it is that you are saying. It's common courtesy to acknowledge the ideas that are not yours. It's good to be sharing ideas that are not yours, like I've said. But you need to be able to demonstrate that you've taken those ideas from somewhere. And that's where referencing, and therefore the avoidance of plagiarism, comes in. But I suppose I think of it as being academic integrity is so much more than just acknowledging the work of others. It's also about academic credibility. And that is where that sense of understanding that you are not the first person to have an opinion. And to recognise that your opinions might not always be valid. They might not be based on anything. They might be based on something your parents told you. They might be based on something that's entirely unfounded. And having academic credibility sees you challenge some of your own thoughts by drawing in upon the work of others. And that ensures that you become a much more well-rounded, well-informed individual. And so we demonstrate this academic integrity and this academic credibility by referencing, by saying where we've got sources from. So by giving bibliographic information and by citing authors within our text, whether that's a footnote or whether that is Harvard. Again, the question that I would probably encourage you to ask of your universities of choice would be to say, and particularly your discipline, would be to say, what referencing system am I going to have to learn? And maybe take a look at that over the summer holidays. Not always the most interesting thing to do over the summer holidays, but definitely gets you in a good place. For example, within politics, which was my subject, we used to use Harvard referencing, whereas other areas of the university might use perhaps Chicago or modern humanities referencing system. Ask your subjects of choice what referencing system they use. Make sure that you know that as soon as possible. Before you need to use it, you'll need to know how to do it. And universities will be very happy to help you with that. Now, I'm going to kind of conclude some of my thoughts and then have a look again at the Q&A. So if you do have some questions about all of this, keep popping them in the Q&A. I will hope to answer them. But my concluding thoughts are really a summary of what we've talked about. You are going to have a range of different types of learning. Not just lessons like you have at the moment, and not just, you know, in like a tutor group or anything like that. You're going to be really engaging with a huge range of people. You are going to be responsible for your own learning, your own time management, and your own relationships with academic staff and with the people around you. It's so much more of an adult, responsible relationship. Practice those 3 Ps or understand them, that preparation, that presence within your reading, within your own independent study, but also within your taught hours, and that pursuit of further knowledge. Hopefully you're going to university because you love your subject and you want to explore it at length and in real depth. Academic referencing, as I've said, is super important, and learning how to do that will just make you feel so much more confident about your work. Now, you may feel fairly intimidated by what you're going to be experiencing, particularly after this session, but you can do this. You have everything you need in order to succeed. We wouldn't let you come into a university if we didn't believe you had the potential to succeed. But there are some skills that you may already have within your locker, or there are other things that you are going to need to practice. But practice makes perfect, and the more you do things, the easier it will become. I always joke that sometimes it takes doing a degree to know how to do a degree really well. But I guarantee you will be absolutely fine. So that's where I'm going to wrap up. I'm just going to have a look at some of the Q&A questions, just to see if there's anything that I haven't addressed. In light of COVID restrictions, are universities now fully back to face-to-face teaching? At Southampton, that's something we're really proud of. It's because that's what students were asking for. We do have face-to-face teaching where possible. Of course, there are some instances of teaching that are actually better online. And so we will have that kind of blended approach, and you will find most universities will have a blended approach. Some aren't fully back to face-to-face teaching. So again, ask your university of choice what they are doing. Another person has asked, I will struggle understanding modules and how to look for them when applying for courses. You will be guided through that process, I guarantee, by the university staff. So I wouldn't worry about that in your first semester. Most of your courses, most of your modules that you will do in your first semester are likely to be compulsory. So that you don't have to worry about that choice, and you will be guided about how to pick those courses when you are faced with that decision. Do I think the relationships between teachers and students is tighter in sixth form or university? I would say in terms of tightness, I think the relationship between teachers and students in sixth form is tighter than university, purely because of the scale that you are on. I still would say I had fuller relationships with my teachers, but I think once you understand that you're not going to have that same relationship, because you don't need to have that same relationship with with your academic staff, then I think you kind of get to grips with that. But you will all have personal academic tutors who you can have more of that teacher-like relationship with. I'm just having a look at some of those other questions. How can you get a first class as you move forward? Do all the things that I've suggested in this. Make sure you are doing your reading. Make sure you are preparing for your lectures. That's how you get a first. Do everything that I've suggested. Understand the mark scheme and what is required of you. Work with the feedback that you receive from some of your pieces of work. Talk with the staff who can support you, and access support resources if you are struggling. So, at Southampton, we have our academic skills service. If that's what's causing you issues, come and utilise those kinds of the services that you would like. Lots of other questions I'm having a look through. What is the university life like for international students? I would say that's probably a tricky one for me to answer from a personal perspective, because I wasn't an international student. However, there are lots and lots of opportunities for international students to integrate if they want to. Now, I know we've observed at Southampton that some international students really want to integrate with the wider university population, and there are plenty of opportunities to do that. We've got certainly at Southampton, we've got over 300 clubs and societies that facilitate that. But then, if you want to kind of keep yourself to yourself and focus on your studies, you can do that. All I would say is just try and make as many friends as possible, if that's what you want to do. Other questions that I'm looking at. Thank you very much. I'm lovely to be here and chat to you guys. What separates Southampton from other universities? Thank you very much, Joshua, for saying I spoke eloquently. There are lots of different things. We are unique in a number of different ways, and I think a lot of that uniqueness comes from our research. So every university will likely say this. The research that we do that feeds into our teaching is what makes those courses distinct. In terms of the environment, I think we're really, really lucky to have a hybrid kind of campus environment. So we are not necessarily based, we're in the city of Southampton, but we're slightly north of the city. So we've got a beautiful campus. So the environment I really love. It's one of the things that I love about going to work. It's the physical environment. And then we have our accommodation sites in a range of places that are close by, but not where you are teaching. And for me, that's another personal uniqueness about the university, is that when you're sat in your hall's bedroom or wherever you might live, you don't have to look at the university. You don't have to look at, the library. You don't need to feel that sense of, I must be working all of the time. I'm having a look at some of these other questions. Do you think it's ideal to get a job at university or just focus on your studies? I think that's a personal choice, if I'm honest. You can get a job if you want to. It depends on your personal circumstances and the money that you need. Remember that universities have lots of opportunities for work at the institution. So I know at Southampton we have a student ambassador scheme, which I love because it means we get to work with our students. They get to support us in this kind of work, and they also they get to showcase the university and lots of other things. Caroline, how am I for time?
No, you're absolutely fine on time. I think you could, we've got another 5 minutes easily, Emma, so I think you could finish.
I'll carry on going.
Would you like me to put them to you?
Pardon?
Would you like me to put them to you to save your voice?
No, I'm honestly
okay. Carry on.
Exams, are they after every term? They are at the end of the semester. So we've got one semester that runs to the end of January, and one that runs till the end from February through to the end of May, beginning of June. And so the exams are entirely dependent on the module and what is kind of expected. So my exams, they were usually 2 hours long. They were essay based, and that was because I was in a social sciences discipline in politics. But equally, I did social stats as a module, and so some of my exams also included mathematical calculations, for example. In terms of university, finances is a really tricky, and I cannot give you a definitive answer. Because it depends on personal circumstances. It depends on the tuition fees that you are likely to be experiencing, and that depends on what type of student you are, and it also depends on what your standard of living is, and what you kind of expect. Whether you are happy to eat your sort of supermarkets basics, or whether you want to, eat caviar every evening, which I doubt you will, but you might want to. What university do I think is ideal for a sporty individual? Any university, really, particularly where they have, I think sporty individuals have traditionally gravitated, I think, sometimes towards institutions like Loughborough. However, most universities will have a very decent sports offering. They will have both a kind of university offered scheme, but then there are also the clubs and societies, which will be run by the student union. How are modules different from the system we use in A-levels? I hope, Joshua, I've already answered that one sort of in the stuff that I've talked about. But instead of, like A-levels is over the course of 2 years, where you are going to be demonstrating all that you've learned across those 2 years, the modules run on a semester by semester basis. You might have some synoptic stuff, which is where you will look at learning over a longer period of time. But again, that depends on the kind of programme that you are doing. What types of sports are done in the school? It's up to you. You are not, it's not compulsory for you to do any sports at all. You do what you do what you want to do. Would classes hold a lot of people in their periods? I don't necessarily know what that question means. I don't know.
I think perhaps, would there be a lot of people in each class, or will they be small?
It depends on the programme. So a first year, so we've got lots of different engineering programmes, for example, at Southampton. So anything from kind of like mechanical engineering through to aerospace and astro. And they will likely have some common modules, which we might see a group of 400 people in there. However, I remember some of my modules only had like 15, 20 of us in. So it completely depends on the course. And finally, can I please say again why academic credibility is so important? I absolutely can go through that again, no problem, because it's one of the key things that you need to learn. You have to demonstrate a couple of things at university. You have to demonstrate that you are not just going on your unfounded opinion. I remember going to university all confident with everything that I believed and I thought was valid to believe. And then when I started reading different perspectives and challenging the perspectives that I held and the perspectives of my parents and the school and the world that I'd grown up in, I started to realise that maybe based on evidence, my opinions were completely unfounded, and in some cases they were wrong. So academic credibility is really, really important. You are demonstrating your ideas through the lens of another's idea. So you might put a point out there. If you're thinking about an essay, you might write a sentence that encapsulates what somebody else has said. And academic integrity comes into it, where you cite that person, where you say, So, for example, the sentence might say, the balance of evidence suggests that X, Y, and Z is the case. That might be your sentence. And then you would, if you're doing Harvard referencing, certainly you would open a bracket and you would put in the author's name, the year of the publication, and any pages that you have referred to. And then you would close the bracket. Alternatively, you might use a footnote system. So acknowledging where ideas have come from is really, really important. And finally, any tips for you when you're writing your personal statements? Absolutely. You will have gathered lots and lots of experiences, and we don't want to see them just listed, like a whole list of everything that you've done that becomes a bit like a shopping list. We want to know about select experiences. So what the activity has been, an ABC rule. What is the activity? So what have you done? That is part of the shopping list. But B, what has been the benefits? So for example, if you've done the EPQ, the extended project qualification, what has been the benefit? Well, have you developed research and academic skills? Probably, hopefully. And C, what is the benefit to the course that you are going to go on to? So how does the benefits that you've taken from the activity relate to your course? How is that going to make you a desirable candidate for that course? So that's a very quick response, but that's probably my thoughts there.